Welcome. Our series, as Tamara said, is Jewish Women of Consequence in the Early Modern Period. We will be introduced to 4 different women spanning the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. Tonight we will discuss 2 women, one of whom I've termed the Jewess, that is, Beila Falk. Jewess because she represents a certain kind of ideal Jewish woman that fulfills the prescriptions of men. And the second is Gitl Kożuchowski, who is a Jewish woman of a different type, as we will see. But before we discuss these specific women, I want to make a few remarks about women's general role in Jewish culture. The Babylonian Talmud in the 5th or 6th century summed up women's cultural role as follows. How do women gain merit? By bringing their sons to the synagogue to learn Torah, and by sending their husbands to the study hall and waiting for them until they come from the study hall. About 1,000 years later, Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, the Rama of Cracow, said much the same thing. If she helps her son or her husband occupy themselves with Torah, she shares the reward with them. In other words, the highest cultural occupation that a Jew can have, that is to study Torah, that's what men are supposed to do. And women's job is to facilitate the cultural accomplishments of their men. This division of cultural labor between the genders is something fundamental in Judaism. For example, in the Shulchan Aruch, the Jewish code, the code of Jewish law, one paragraph asks, Mihem hachayavim b'tzitzit, who are obligated to wear tzitzit? And the author of the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Falk, says, women and enslaved persons are exempt because it is a time-bound positive commandment. That is, it's something positive, you have to do it, and you have to do it at a certain time during the day. This same Moshe Isserlis, in his gloss on Caro's Shulchan Aruch, pointed out, in any event, if they want to wear tzitzit and make a blessing over them, they may, just as with other time-bound commandments. Women are exempt from sitting in the sukkah, from making a bracha on the lulav and etrog, from hearing the shofar, from counting the omer, etc. But each of these things they may decide to do and recite a blessing over them. That is, even though these are time-bound positive commandments, women are free to adopt them. However, the Rama continues, it appears as arrogance, mechazeh yohara, and therefore women should not wear tzitzit. That is, while technically women are certainly permitted to wear tzitzit, they shouldn't do it because it appears as arrogance, yohara. Now, in the 16th century, in other texts, this word yohara, arrogance, is used to denote a person who aspires to a status that he doesn't deserve. A student who tries to get to the status of his teacher, or a regular person who wants people to think he's a pietist, a chassid. These people are showing yohara. So, in other words, a woman who is wearing tzitzit, which is a male symbol, is displaying yohara, that she wants to aspire to male status. And that is something we don't allow. So even though technically she could wear tzitzit, she should not do it. It is violating the gender boundary. Another example of enforcing the gender boundary and gender hierarchy, there's a daily blessing that men are supposed to say every morning, "Blessed are you, God, who has not made me a woman." the standard explanation for this is because men have more commandments, more mitzvot to observe than women do. As we just said, women are exempt from positive, time-bound commandments. But the effect of this is that it's better to be a man than a woman. And as Elisheva Baumgarten has pointed out in her latest book, there is a hierarchy, angels, men, and women. Women are exempt from positive time-bound commandments, as we have said, which ensures that they have the flexibility to be facilitators. Since they are not bound to these to the clock, they can facilitate home life. They can facilitate their menfolk's cultural obligations. On the other hand, there are 3 commandments, 3 mitzvot, that are specially for women, as we see in this woodcut. They are referred to as mitzvot chana, that is challah, separating a portion of the dough that was supposed to be given to the priests. Nidah, all of the commandments that or the practices that are around menstruation and sex, and hadlakat nerot, lighting the candles. Now, just as women are exempt from positive time-bound commandments, in practice, if not in theory, men are exempt from these mitzvot. Of course, men have nothing to do with the nidah, the menstruation practices. But in theory, men should have to separate the challah and men should have to light candles. But in practice, these belong to women. And it's interesting that while Judaism ignored original sin, that is, Adam's original sin, it did not ignore Eve's original sin. These 3 mitzvot are explained as expiation by women for all time for the fact that Eve facilitated Adam's downfall. That is, she created darkness where there should have been light. She shed his blood, and therefore women lose blood every month. And Adam, and by extension the Jews, were supposed to be the perfect gift for God, and Eve corrupted that. And because of that, so women now have to give the challah, the separate piece of challah, when they bake. So this is an inversion of the idea that women are exempt from certain mitzvot that men have to do, but they are especially obligated for these mitzvot because there's a connection to women's history. So a Jewess conforms to a male conception of what a female Jew should be like. And the person we're going to discuss now is Beila Falk as a classic Jewess. Beila Falk was born in Lviv. Her father was Yisrael Idols, who was a leader of the Jewish community of Lviv. He was a businessman, not a rabbi. She married Rabbi Yehoshua ben Alexander Falk HaKohen, who was most famous for the books that he wrote, that is, the Prisha Udrisha, commentary on the Arba'at Turim of Yaakov ben Asher, one of the basic legal codes of Judaism, and their son, Yosef Falk. When the son published his father's work, he also published an introduction praising his father and giving many biographical details about his father, and this is a 3-page introduction. But there's also a 4th page. And on the 4th page, he talks about his mother, and he gives a tribute to her. He says, "Her splendor, majesty, and glory not only shined over us, but on all of her generation. She was the glory of all the daughters of Israel. Jewish daughters saw her. They affirmed her pleasant deeds and prestige. She guided them in the right path. All daughters of Israel should learn from her example." Yosef praises his mother. What did she do specifically that made her a model for all Jewish women? Well, first of all, she observed specific mitzvot, commandments. We said earlier that the Talmud says, and this continued, that women are supposed to facilitate their husbands' and sons' Torah study. And Yosef Falk says that his mother did that. His mother supported her husband and his students. She provided the conditions for them to study. She visited the mourners and the sick. She gave more charity than she could afford. And she prayed every day in the women's section of the synagogue. She arrived before everyone else, and she was the last one to leave. And note, these are things that she did as a woman. She did not do them with men. Finally, after her husband died, some years later, she made aliyah. She came to Eretz Israel, and she lived there for about 8 years, and finally died there. But she not only did mitzvot that made her a model woman, she also performed what we would call para mitzvot. She made tzitzit, that is, the ritual fringes on the garments, on the talit. She made the gid for the Torah and the tefillin, that is the thread that is made out of goat or cow goat or cow, gid. I'm losing the English word for now. She also wove talitot, prayer shawls, and she sewed together kittles, that is what we might call prayer smocks that men would wear, especially on the high holidays, the Yamim Noraim. And she prayed extra long time, much more than everyone else. So these are para mitzvot. Another thing that makes a model woman is to sacralize the mundane, to take the everyday and to elevate it, to give it an infusion of holiness. How did she do that? First of all, she was ascetic. She was vegan. Not only vegan, she would not eat any fruit from trees. So not only would she not eat animal products, she would not eat fruit. She rejected luxury, even though she was the only daughter of Yisrael idols, and she could have lived a life of luxury. She was mistapeket b'mu'at. She was satisfied with the minimum. She refused to waste time. She was humble. She cared for her children, grandchildren, and other children. She instructed them. She fed them. She laundered their clothes. She shampooed their hair for Shabbat. And she cooked wonderful Shabbat meals, both for her own family and for the poor. One more thing that Beila did. I said before that there is a gender boundary, and there are strictures to prevent men from crossing into the women and women from crossing into the men's. But this model woman did certain things like a man. What were these things? She studied Parshat HaShavua, the weekly Torah portion that's read in the synagogue. She gave Divrei Torah at meals with students. That is, when she was serving meals to her husband and his students, at the same time, she would break in with words of Torah. She also mastered what her son Yosef terms Dinei Nashim and Hilchot Nida. That is, the laws pertaining to women and the laws of menstruation, and taught women. This probably refers to the 3 mitzvot we talked about before, the laws of separating the challah, the laws of lighting candles before Shabbat and at the beginning of holidays, and the laws of menstruation and sex. And Beila protested against mistaken candle lighting practices. You have to understand some background here. It is forbidden to light fire on Shabbat. On the other hand, once you make the blessing over the candles, you have essentially accepted Shabbat. You have declared Shabbat has begun. So if you make the blessing, you can't light the candles anymore. So the practice has been accepted for centuries that women light the candles, cover their face so as to not benefit from the light, recite the blessing, and then look at the candles. So in this way, they have lit the candles before Shabbat started, but the candles have not started functioning, so to speak, until after the blessing, the bracha, is made. Beila protested that women did the same thing on Yom Tov, on holidays. Now, holidays, you're allowed to use fire. You can't kindle fire, but you can transfer fire from one thing to another. So on Yom Tov, a woman should say the blessing and then light the candle using another candle or using a match that was lit from something already burning. So Beila was very firm that women on Yom Tov should first say the blessing and then actually light the candles. Secondly, the second day of Yom Tov, the second day of a holiday, women do not light the candles until after the synagogue service. In her time, in Beila's time, many women did the same thing the first day of the holiday. That is, the first day of the holiday, they waited to light the candles till after the synagogue service. Well, that was mistaken. They should have lit the candles as on Shabbat, 20 minutes before sunset, or 18 minutes before sunset. So Beila strongly protested these two mistaken practices, and rabbis argued whether she was correct or not into the 19th century. So her positions were well known. The second woman we're going to talk about is Gitl Kożuchowski. Gitl Kożuchowski was married to David Theodor or Todros Kożuchowski. They were, if not the richest, certainly among the richest Jews of Cracow in the mid-17th century. And we have, both in Hebrew and in Polish, the will of David Todros Kożuchowski. Again, a word of background. According to the letter of the law, a wife does not inherit her husband's estate. A wife is not a yoreshet, an heir. When a man dies, the wife is entitled to whatever was promised to her in her ketubah, in her marriage contract, plus the ketubah implies that she is entitled to a place to live and to a living allowance. So, a woman is not one of the yorshim. She's not one of the official heirs. Those are sons. And if there are no sons, then there is the chain of inheritance, brothers, uncles, etc. A husband, however, is entitled to give his wife a gift while he is still alive, or to write in his will that she is entitled to a gift after he dies. And what Todros did was as follows. In this will, he said, I hereby declare before you today, that is before the witnesses, that from this moment I am giving as the gift of a quick person, a live person, an absolute and irrevocable gift from today, forever, to my dear wife, Gittle. May she live, all of my chattels, wherever they may be, under the sky. Note, he is only giving her chattels, not real estate. This may be because there is an opinion in the Talmud that if a man declares that he is giving his wife everything, that what that really means is he is appointing her as the opatropos, as the supervisor, as the overseer. He's not actually giving her everything. So it may be that Todros Kożuchowski wanted to be sure that people understood that he was actually giving her this bequest, or it may be that he decided for whatever reason that he only wanted to give her the chattels and not the real estate. However, as we'll see, she was still very much involved with the real estate. So, what does he give her? Silver, gold and pearls, copper, iron, and tin, silver and gold jewelry, and clothing, anything that the mouth can call movable property. It is all hers, to put her hand, to control, to sell, to loan, to bequeath and bestow, and to gift. It should be hers as money that is never paid back. So he is emphasizing that she is entitled to everything that he owns that is movable property. In addition to which, he says in the will that she does not have to take the widow's vow that she did not receive anything in her lifetime that would offset what she is entitled to in the ketubah. No, this is all in addition to the ketubah. Whatever was promised in the ketubah is hers, in addition to all of these chattels. Moreover, Todros has appointed his aforesaid wife, Gittle, overseer, power, executor, and governor over the entire estate, from the smallest to the greatest item, as of today. For all the days of her life, he has given her explicit right of credibility versus all of the heirs. Now, if you read medieval and early modern rabbinic literature, it is full of, especially responsa literature, full of conflicts between wives and sons, usually sons of the first wife against the second wife. So the sons are called the Yorshim, the legal heirs. And the wife is laying claim based on what she's entitled to in the ketubah to a part of the estate. What Todros is saying here is that Gitl is the executor over the entire estate. That is not only the chattels that he is giving her, that she is now the owner of, but also everything else, which includes the real estate, as we will see. She is the executor. Mr. Todros attached to her as support to help and to effectuate her eldest son, the aforementioned Mr. Chaim. So she is the executor, but her son, Chaim, is the co-executor. He will be co-executor with his mother of the entire estate as against the other heirs. So this I see as a guarantee or as a reinforcement that Gitl is entitled to be the executors. If the other heirs have complaints, well, one of the heirs, Chaim, is cooperating with Gitl. And here I think is a key phrase. She will conduct all business as she sees fit and as she desires, as she always has, as she always has. This implies that Gitl was a partner with Todros all through their married life. This was not that as he approached the end of his life, he decided to appoint her as his successor. This implies that she was his partner in the business, and she knew how the business ran, and she knew what to do for her benefit and for the benefit of all the heirs. She and all of her as yet unmarried heirs shall be supported from the household budget as before. She is not going to get some allowance, as the standard ketubah would imply. No. She is responsible for the household budget, and she is responsible for supporting everyone from that budget. What does that mean? Conversely, whatever she manages to earn by doing business of any kind shall go toward that household budget. That is, she's going to be running all of their enterprises. And whatever money she earns, she is allowed to manage, to spend. The interest and the profit on the interest belongs solely to her. She does not have to contribute or spend anything for her needs or the needs of her household, because all of her requirements are to come from the household budget. So she's not just getting an allowance. She is continuing the enterprise as it has always been, and she is the person who is entitled to the income and to decide how to spend it. Todros has ordered her to be the mistress and overseer of all the real estate. So he did not leave her the real estate as he did with the chattels, but he has appointed her as the steward of the real estate. Whether houses of stone or wood, that is, they owned numerous houses. Stone houses were more expensive, wood houses less expensive. Or seats in the synagogue. Seats in the synagogue were also real estate, whether they be seats in the men's section or seats in the women's section. For the rest of her life, she can admit and remove tenants at will, and should receive all of the rent from all of the houses and synagogue seats and add it to the household budget. So she may not be the official owner of the real estate, but she is entitled to manipulate the real estate, to rent it out as she sees fit. And she is the manager of their entire enterprise, of their big business. She even has the power to go further and evict her sons and daughters from the houses and the seats and put others in their stead. In other words, if Todros himself, or at some point Gitl, has given one of their sons or daughters a house to live in, I presume we're talking about married sons or daughters, or seats in the synagogue that they could use, she can change her mind. She can cancel Todros's decision and put other sons and daughters in these places or rent it out to someone else. If she wants to collect rent from her sons from the houses and synagogue seats, it is up to her. Now, if she wants to be, as we say in Hebrew, large, if she wants to be generous, she can let her children live in these houses and occupy these seats for free. But if she decides to be a hard-headed businesswoman, even with her children, she can collect rent from her own children. And she is now the head of the family. Mrs. Gitl has authority to make matches for her sons, to take them into her household, to support them, to feed them, to keep them at her table, to host them always with their wives. There is an institution called kest, that is literally cost. In the early modern period, 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, it was customary, especially in wealthy households, as the Kożuchowskis were, that young married children, and they could be married very young if they were rich, would be supported for a number of years by the parents. Actually, when young children got married at the age of 12, 13, 14, it was a form of adoption. The common practice was for the son-in-law to come and live with his young wife's family. And they essentially were adopting another child, which is why it was rich people who could go into this institution of caste, because it meant adopting more children. So Gitl has the authority to make matches, which was a very important activity for parents, as we'll see in our next session when we talk about Gitl of Hamlin. As in our time, parents are pretty much obsessed with the idea of how are we going to pay for college for our child, and will our child get into university? In the early modern period, the question was, how good of a marriage match can we make for our child to make sure that their future is assured, both in terms of prestige and finances. So Gitl has the authority to make matches and to decide whom to support with kest and who to let loose to be on their own. And the money for supporting these kest children will come out of the household budget as she desires and sees fit, for however many years she wants to commit herself, and no one can protest. So she is the boss. She is also entitled to bring into the store in Kazimierz, that is the Jewish section of Cracow, to become part of the business there, whichever sons she wants. So not only does she decide about whom to support as a young married and whom to allow to live in the houses she owns, she also decides whom to bring into the business. whether those currently married or those who are still single. And this is somewhat surprising. The sons themselves, their wives, or the couple together. In other words, she may say to her son, well, I don't think you're a very good businessman, but your wife, she can come into the business. So she will not necessarily favor her own child over the in-law child for the rest of her life. Likewise, she can remove from the business in the store her sons and their wives, all of them or some of them as she wishes, whenever she feels like it, till the end of her life, forever. So she can make all of the business decisions. And again, we will see this is similar to what Gitl of Hamelin, who lived in Germany around a generation later, she had similar powers and authority after her husband died. So she is the executor of the will. She is the manager of the enterprise. She is the head of the family. She is the lady of the house, the power in the business, and the overseer of the estate as long as she lives. It is a commonplace in historiography that from the point of view of autonomy, authority, power, in the early modern period, the women best situated to have autonomy, to have agency, as we like to say today, were affluent widows. An affluent widow had money that she controlled. She did not have to answer to a man, whether her father or her husband or some other male authority. She could decide what she wanted to do on her own. And as we'll see next time, Gitl in Germany in the late 17th and early 18th century gives us several examples of widows who decided not to remarry specifically because they didn't want to subordinate themselves to the authority of a man. Gitl herself says that she saw no advantage, excuse me, she saw no advantage to remarrying. It wouldn't help her children. Until, in the end, she did decide to remarry with not too happy consequences, as we'll see next week. So, Gitl Kożuchowski fits this pattern of independent, autonomous widows of means who decide how to run their lives and the lives of their children. In addition to giving his wife such broad authority and so much wealth, Todros did something else that is really extra halakhic. Todros further ordered to take 500 zloty from the household budget and the real estate income for the dowry of his granddaughter, the eldest daughter of Mr. Chaim at the time of her marriage. That is, he wants to make sure that this granddaughter, whom he obviously was acquainted with, would have a decent dowry to get married. And of course, dowry was the material basis of the new household. The amount of the dowry would determine where the new couple was on the socioeconomic scale. What could they do with 500 zloty? Could they buy a house? Could they start a business? 500 zloty was a nice amount. It was about 5 times what the minimum was considered to be. So Todros was worried about his granddaughters. In addition to this granddaughter, and thus for all of his granddaughters, whether the daughters of his sons or of his daughters, praise be God, 200 zloty for the dowry at the time of the marriage from the real estate income. So since daughters also do not inherit, he's making sure that his granddaughters will have a stake for their dowries when the time comes. All of this was done before us, the undersigned witnesses. Mrs. Gittle also formally confirmed and affirmed all of the above details. Actually, it was Gittle who decided that there should be a Polish version of the will filed with the Polish governor's court, just to make sure that everything was undoubtedly legal. So there was the Hebrew version filed with the Jewish community and the Polish version filed with the Polish authorities. Again, we see Gittle has agency. Now, Beila also had agency, but of a different kind. Beila had agency within the defined cultural area for Jewish women to go above and beyond. And she was so good at it that she was also allowed to step into the men's side of the gender boundary. But note, she could talk about Jewish law, but Jewish law that was connected to women specifically. So even when she crossed the boundary, it was as a woman. Of course, we don't know what divrei Torah, what words of Torah she said, whether there was some gender aspect to it. So here are our 2 women. And now, if there are any questions, I'll be happy to try to respond. One thing I should mention, the word I was looking for before was tendon. The gid is the tendon, and that's the thread to sew the Torahs, and the tefillin comes from the tendon.
Thank you very much, Professor Rosman. Let's see, we do have a few questions. If everyone is any other questions, this is the time to write them. Okay, so the Liborka wants to know that you mentioned when Gittle was born and where. Do we know when she passed away and where?
Actually, I don't know when she was born, and I don't know when she died. In general, I would say the Kożuchowskis would be a great doctoral project for someone who wants to get involved. These are obviously very important people, and I'm sure the archives contain a lot of information about them.
Okay, Chaya wants to know if such a detailed will, was it common? Because it seems that a will like that might have caused also strong objections. So were there others like it?
It was common for rich people. Somebody who didn't have so much wouldn't have such an intricate will. Obviously, Todros and I assume Gittle were trying to prevent challenges to the will. as I said in the beginning, I think that's why he noted that she became the owner of only metaltalin, of chattels, and not of the real estate. I think he was being very careful that the will would not be challenged, and he emphasized several times that she did not have to take the widow's oath, that she had not received any part of her ketubah before. He emphasizes time and time again that the heirs, the official Yorshim, the official heirs, that his sons, have no standing to interfere with her authority. So he, and I assume she, because she obviously was connected to the drafting of this will, were very concerned to make sure that all the I's were dotted and T's were crossed. Somebody who was not so wealthy didn't have to worry about these things.
So Sarah wants to know how representative or exceptional were Beila and Gitl of the Jewish female contemporaries?
Well, obviously, they're both exceptional, each in her own way. Beila, as described by her son, Yosef Yospe, is an exceptionally pious and learned woman. We don't have numbers, but I would speculate that something like half the women were illiterate, couldn't read or write, and she obviously could read, write, and she was educated, and she could give a Devar Torah. She could express an opinion about halakha, so she was very well educated. And she was exceptional in her piety, which is what her son emphasizes. Gittle was exceptional in her business affairs, in her wealth, in her authority, her autonomy. But the margin tells you where the center is. If the margin is here, the center is here. If the margin is here, the center is here. So by looking at the exceptional cases, you can get an idea of what the standard is. Also where things are going, what direction they're going in.
Okay. Another question. Were the rabbis accepting of these approaches?
Well, they're very accepting of Beila. As I mentioned, her opinion about the candle lighting for the holidays, Yom Tov, was debated by rabbis after she died. The Magen Avraham, one of the main commentators on the Shulchan Aruch, discusses it, and several other rabbis up to 19th century Hungarian rabbis, the Khatam Sofer, expressed their opinions as whether she was right or wrong. I think the preponderance of rabbis come down on her side that she was correct. And they certainly would have no objection to her super piety. And as for Gitl Kożuchowski, again, if you study the will, you see that it was drafted very carefully so it would conform to halakhic niceties. So there would be no rabbinic objection.
I'll take one last question, and I apologize for those who we didn't manage to answer their question. Last one. Where would these ladies have received their Jewish education, as we can assume that they did not attend yeshiva?
Well, that's a good question. From various hints that we have, it seems that in Poland, girls did not go to cheder. From Gitl, who was in Germany, she seems to say that girls might attend cheder, that is elementary school, with the boys to learn how to read. But in Poland, it seems girls did not attend school, how did they learn? They were tutored at home. Either a teacher was hired or more typically a relative, a female relative, mother, grandmother, uncle, brother, father would teach them. So somebody like Beila, who was married to the great scholar, it would seem that she, in her youth, before she was married, although she probably was married at a very young age, was tutored at home by either a hired teacher or a relative. Also remember, the standard ideal was men study, women read. What do I mean? Men studied texts beginning in Cheder in a foreign language, Hebrew, Aramaic, very complex texts. Women read books in Yiddish, which was their own language. The same letters as Hebrew letters, but a different language. So for a boy to understand what Rashi has to say about the weekly Torah portion, he has to learn a language and learn how to read Rashi. Whereas for a girl, and many, many boys, by sitting around the table Friday night and listening to their mother or father or whomever read the Yiddish, so-called women's Bible, they would gain much the same knowledge. It was called Tzenorena. They would gain much the same knowledge that a boy who was learning in school would learn from Rashi. That is, what is the rabbinic interpretation of the Bible? So that Tzenorena would bring many of the same midrashim that Rashi would bring. So a girl could learn just by reading or being read to at home many of the same things that a boy would learn in school.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Rosman, on behalf of Bet Avichai and our audience. Do you want to give us just a hint to who we'll be discussing next week?
Yes. Next week, we'll be talking about the famous Gitl of Hamelin. She's called Gitl of Hamelin thanks to the Pied Piper, who, if he had lived, would have lived about 400 years before her in Hamelin. She actually was Gitl of Hamburg, but for 2 years, she and her husband lived in Hamelin as Kest, what we talked about earlier. That is, her husband's parents supported them for 2 years in Hamelin, and so it's popular to say that she's Gitl of Hamelin, but she spent most of her life in Hamburg, and we will talk about her life. I've called her the phylogynist. Phylogynist, I think you could say, is a feminist without the politics. So we will discuss Gitl, the feminist without the politics.